Hare Krishna. Welcome to HDG Live, or whatever I'm going to call myself this week. Some devotees in New Zealand, Arjuna and some other devotees there in the Auckland area had some questions. So I'm going to address those questions. Here we go. Let's see. First question. After spending the last few years promoting Krishna West, I see that somebody noticed. A, what have you learned about how to influence devotees to change? And then B, if you had the chance, would you do anything differently? Okay, the first question, what have I learned about how to influence devotees to change? Well, to be honest, I tried, of course, to be as nice as possible, which didn't always come out in a way that some people thought was nice. But I would say in general, I simply tried my best, and of course we're all imperfect, but I tried my best to speak the truth to the best of my understanding, to say what was necessary in my view, and just to say it as well as I could, and as convincing as I could, because I think it is essential in order to save the Western Hare Krishna movement over historical time. I don't mean that today or next week or next month or next year the movement will collapse, but I think over historical time, yes, it is critical. It is actually extremely important. So I didn't target any particular group. I'm not into targeting, to be honest. I mean, occasionally, like for example, I'm preparing an academic paper for a very important conference organized by the Bhaktivedanta Institute in Gainesville, Florida, which is being co-sponsored by the University of Florida. And because that's an academic conference, I'm presenting an academic paper. So that is an example, you could say, of targeting. And I've targeted devotees in general with Krishna West, because I'm trying to convince them. And I'm trying to convince them because I think it's really important for Prabhupada. Apart from that, I didn't target young devotees, older devotees. Perhaps because in general, I have a real serious aversion to trying to manipulate people in any way. To me, if I make a reasonable argument, I think I can try to convince people, but not manipulate them. And so I aimed my preaching just at reasonable people. I tried to present arguments that would convince people who are reasonable and who feel somehow, you could say, ethically required to act upon their best reason. As Prabhupada said, in the old Vedic culture, if you convinced someone or defeated their argument, they had to follow your argument. Of course, that's not, in Prabhupada says, it's not that way anymore, either inside of ISKCON or outside of ISKCON. But that's what I did. That's what I do. I just try to present reasonable arguments for reasonable people, whether they're women or men or old or young or whatever. Just try to be reasonable for reasonable people. As far as what I've learned about how to influence devotees to change, that if I'm reasonable and convincing, reasonable people will take it seriously. Again, people who are both reasonable and also who feel required to act upon their best understanding. If I had the chance, would I do anything differently? I guess I might have avoided certain very specific little things that happened in this or that place, but I really had a strong sense that Krishna wanted me to say these things. And I knew as I was speaking that what I was saying would be controversial for some people. And I wanted to avoid conflict as far as possible, but somehow I felt very strongly that Krishna wanted me to say these things. I know when we first started Krishna West, one problem you could say was that a lot of people in their minds mixed Krishna West with certain hermeneutical views I had. I mean, I talked about the fact that Bhagavatam gives a different version of the offense to Draupadi in the gambling hall. Bhagavatam definitely gives a different version. And Jiva Goswami said the Bhagavatam is our most important scripture, and so I accept the Bhagavatam version. Things like that, in the realm of hermeneutics, like how do you understand a sacred text in a reasonable way? And even though that wasn't Krishna West, people thought it was, and there wasn't so much I could do about it for two reasons. Number one, because I had made all those controversial hermeneutic statements long before I started Krishna West. And number two, because a lot of people, especially people who are critical, do not pay attention. And so even though I said over and over and over again that this is not Krishna West, this is called hermeneutics, critics just couldn't seem to understand that, even though apparently they spoke English and I was speaking in English, and I kept saying these are very different things, but they could not quite grasp it. So I'll go on to the next question. It would appear that Srila Prabhupada stressed not eating grains cooked by non-devotees and considered it very important. Recently in ISKCON, or at least in New Zealand, the attitude toward eating store-bought bread, etc., or eating at restaurants has become very relaxed. Should we consider this a concerning deviation from the standard Prabhupada wanted for us? First of all, Prabhupada at times himself relaxed the standard. For example, in the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarupa Das Goswami, we find that Prabhupada visited Hong Kong and stayed in the Hong Kong Hilton Hotel and ordered jalebis from the restaurant. That's in the Lilamrita, which are grains cooked by non-devotees. Prabhupada also, in India, took meals in hundreds and hundreds of homes of life members or potential life members. In fact, according to Indian culture and etiquette, going to people's homes and accepting their hospitality and prasadam or their food was a big way of making life members, and Prabhupada did it all the time. And these people were not necessarily following the regular principles. They were not necessarily Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and they were not necessarily vegetarians. Of course, they gave Prabhupada pure vegetarian food, but Prabhupada ate all the time. I mean, he did it probably hundreds of times. He took meals with these people. So when Prabhupada was here, we have to remember that at least outside of India, practically almost all the devotees in ISKCON, almost all of them lived in temples. And so Prabhupada was teaching temple standards. He wanted to establish a strict temple standard. So I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but I also don't want to get into that kind of like that silly language you hear sometimes in ISKCON, that someone is going to go to hell or not going to go back to Godhead or this or that or something else. So as far as the relaxed standards, maybe I won't comment, because if I say it's not that important, I'll get in a lot of trouble. And if I say it is very important, I'll be a hypocrite. So I will simply say that Prabhupada established certain strict temple standards, which he himself did not always follow when he was not in temples. I think I'll leave it at that. Regarding Vedic cosmology, does the Bhagavatam differentiate between the earth as we know it and Bhumandala? My dear departed godbrother, Siddhartha Prabhu, wrote a brilliant book on this topic and showed mathematically, to my satisfaction, that Bhumandala, which is a series of concentric islands and seas, sort of, is actually a brilliant description of the solar system. So it's a symbolic description, as Prabhupada has shown, of the solar system. And so in that sense, the earth is the earth, and Bhumandala is Bhumandala, the ecliptic. It's the plane on which the different planets circle around the sun, the solar system, and actually the Bhumandala description. If you look at the numbers, it shows an understanding long before these things were known in Europe, in the Western world, of the path of the orbits of the various planets and so on. So I am convinced by Siddhartha's presentation. B, is Bhudevi, Mother Earth, our little Earth planet, or all of Jambudweep? I've never really taken that much interest in topics like that, to be honest. We know what the Earth is. Bhudevi is not, the goddess is not actually shaped like a ball. A goddess is a goddess. And so she's the goddess of the Earth. She's not the ball, which is the Earth. And as far as Jambudweep, we'd have to look again in the Bhagavatam, but I've never really given that a lot of thought. Did Lord Varaha lift our planet Earth or the whole of Jambudweep? Well, sort of the same as the previous question. I'm asking you because of your knowledge of Sanskrit. Thank you. I'll have to look it up. So whoever wrote that question, if you write me a personal letter and send me the relevant verse numbers, maybe I can look it up. Next question 4. Do you feel so-called devotional cloth, as if, should be gone altogether from ISKCON's public appearance, as in none of it on Harinams, and possibly even none when we host public events? Well, there's a question I've heard a few times before. First of all, I am not convinced there is such a thing as devotional cloth as opposed to just cloth. I see no indication in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that, for example, when Lord Chaitanya took out his Harinam party, or on other occasions, that devotees were dressed differently from other people. We see on the covers of our books, Chaitanya Charitamrita, that Lord Chaitanya and the 6 Goswamis are not dressed in ISKCON, quote-unquote, devotional cloth. They dress like sadhus in general at that time. So the whole idea that there's Vaishnav dress or sadhu, what does the question say? Devotional cloth, I'm not sure that's even real. And as far as should it be gone from ISKCON's public appearance, I am, in terms of dress code, very much a pragmatist. The Bhagavatam gives a dress code for sannyasis and brahmacharis, which is mostly to go naked. Don't try this. Or to wear deerskin. And then Lord Chaitanya rejected that explicitly. Even though the Bhagavatams remain scripture, Lord Chaitanya did not follow those particular standards because they were no longer practical. Lord Chaitanya and the 6 Goswamis and his other disciples used other dress, and then Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada did not use the dress that Lord Chaitanya and his followers used. So there is no universal or absolute devotional cloth or dress, because what we find is that different generations of Vaishnavas and even Krishna himself just do what's practical in their time. So as far as should we ever wear the devotional cloth, maybe there could be some ceremonial occasions. I'm interested in trying to save this planet. So if going out in public wearing, this Indian dress, somewhat archaic Indian dress, since most Indians don't use it anymore, So if going out in public in not devotional cloth, but Indian cloth, if that's going to help save this planet, then we should do it. If it's not going to help save the planet, or if it's going to be an impediment to saving the planet, then I believe we shouldn't do it. It's practical. It's not theoretical. It's not philosophical. Ultimately, I'm not in charge of ISKCON. I'm not the Acharya, capital A of ISKCON. I just, I'm a member of ISKCON, and I do the best I can, just like so many other devotees do. So should we wear it at all? That's a practical question to me. It's not a philosophical question. So maybe if ISKCON did a little marketing and actually studied and thought about these things, we might come up with a practical answer. How important is science preaching, such as the work of Sariputta Prabhu and Dhruva, or the work of the Christian scientist Rupert Sheldrake, or the work, I suppose it should be of the Christian scientist Rupert Sheldrake? It's very important. Prabhupada thought the Bhaktivinoda Institute was most important. So yeah, it's as important as any preaching in the world. Should devotees spend efforts studying and utilizing these types of arguments and developing them if a devotee has the ability? You have to be good at it. So if by studying the works of Sariputta or Rupert Sheldrake or Dhruva, if this enhances your missionary work, then absolutely. You just do whatever is practical. So yes, if you can read and understand these works, then it makes you a better teacher of Krishna consciousness, and do it. Next, you mentioned a quote from Prabhupada stating that even the manner or worship could be different according to time and place. Yes, that's Prabhupada's purport for the Bhagavatam 4.8.54. I'm wondering how this applies to offering prasadam. Sometimes we buy something to top up our lunch. I guess that's how they talk in New Zealand. America, we say top off, but since I'm not an American chauvinist, there's nothing wrong with top up. Sometimes we buy something to top up our lunch and have little time to do a standard offering, or sometimes we have a toddler screaming at us. That's, as we say, nectar. A toddler screaming at us that they are hungry as we take something out of a packet, praying Krishna will accept it. Well, we reason with the child to wait. Well, Krishna eats and recite some mantras a few times. Are the kinds of offerings done in these circumstances, sometimes just the repetition of the Maha Mantra a few times, a compromise? Does Krishna accept this kind of offering? How should we feel about this kind of thing? What are the essential elements of good offering? Well, essential elements of a good offering are that you're really thinking about Krishna and you're really in your heart offering to Krishna. It's not just about how many mantras you chant. I mean, obviously in our temples, we have a standard format for offering, and that's the way ISKCON does it. So if you're in a temple and you're making an offering on an altar, or even if you are offering on your home altar, there's a standard for that. As far as a toddler screaming, if I had a toddler screaming at me, I would just feed him or her, like, immediately. I would say, Hare Krishna, please accept this, Krishna, and then I would do it very quickly and feed the toddler. That's definitely what I would do. So I remember that when I first took sannyas, I think the day after I took sannyas, we went on Prabhupada's morning walk. And, excuse me, I think it was maybe Vishnu Jana or Satrupa asked Prabhupada whether we should travel, sannyasis should travel with deities. Prabhupada said no. He said no. Lord Chaitanya never traveled with deities, which is why so many ISKCON sannyasis travel with deities. Joking. Anyway, so Prabhupada said no. So when I took sannyas in 72 and 73, I was traveling around America preaching in colleges. We did offerings. They weren't always as formal as in the temple. They were usually perhaps more simple, and but they were devotional, but there were different circumstances. So I think the general principle is Krishna says, offer to me. The details, there are time, place, and circumstances, time, place, and circumstance considerations, although in the temples there's more importance in actually following the normal ritualistic offering. So I would say just be practical in whatever situation you're in, but also be Krishna conscious and really think of Krishna and really offer him. This question relates to Guru Tattva. That's my Tattva. I've heard you debunking the deifying of Prabhupada. This has me curious to understand about Guru Tattva. Surely there is some mystical element in the guru-disciple relationship. Could you say something about that? For example, we hear stories of devotees praying to their spiritual master and having their prayers answered. My interpretation of this phenomenon is that Krishna delivers our prayers to that personality, and that personality responds with sentiments which Krishna then turns into a reality. Is this an accurate understanding of this phenomenon? Well, I'm glad you understand that gurus are phenomenal. Anyway, we have to be precise. I've tried to encourage devotees to be precise in their language. I have not said that Prabhupada shouldn't be deified, because Prabhupada is a type of legitimate deity. Rather, I've said he shouldn't be mythologized. There's a difference. Prabhupada is worshipable. And if a deity means a worshipable person, then Prabhupada should be deified or should be recognized as being a type of worshipable deity, a worshipable personality. As far as mythologize, let's see what the dictionary says. Mythologize means to convert into myth or mythology. Create or promote an exaggerated or idealized image. So, for example, saying that Prabhupada is materially omniscient, he knows everything materially, or he's materially infallible, contradicts what Prabhupada said about himself. So, don't worry about this little band-aid, it's just a little procedure I had. Prabhupada is a pure devotee. Prabhupada did come from Krishna. Prabhupada is qualified to save us. That should be enough, right? I mean, that's good enough. But when we start saying things about Prabhupada that Prabhupada rejected as silly and nonsensical, such as that Prabhupada is materially infallible or materially omniscient, then that is mythologizing. So I accept Prabhupada as he presents himself, and I don't accept Prabhupada. I don't accept versions of Prabhupada that don't agree with what Prabhupada said about himself. So someone may present Prabhupada as less than he is. Someone may present Prabhupada as more than he is. In both cases, it's just not what Prabhupada said about himself. That's the point. So what do I think about Prabhupada? Whatever he told us about himself. That's what I think about Prabhupada. So as far as prayers, the Guru is not omniscient. So if, let's say, 20 million people are simultaneously praying to a pure devotee, does a pure devotee hear, understand simultaneously 20 million different prayers at the same time? He's actually hearing all those prayers. That'd be kind of a tough thing to do. That would be a little difficult. And so if you say, at what point is someone just very intelligent, or is someone in expanded consciousness? And at what point does it really start to look like we are claiming omniscience for that person? So if you say that someone can at the same time hear and process 10 million prayers, that sounds a lot like omniscience to me. I don't know what it sounds like to you. And take, for example, Prabhupada's appearance date, when perhaps easily we might have 10 million people praying to Prabhupada at the same time, or 1 million people. Maybe, what if it's 500,000? I have no idea what the number is. But I know in his manifest pastimes on this earth, Prabhupada, like any normal person, couldn't listen to 2 people at the same time. Like if Prabhupada was talking to somebody and someone else said something, he would just say, I can't listen to that now, I'm talking to this person. So again, in his manifest pastimes, Prabhupada really, like any normal person, would not even speak to 2 people at the same time. What about 200,000? What about 2 million? So therefore, my understanding, also based on my own experiences, that it is really Krishna that hears our prayers, and Krishna knows if the Guru is pleased with a particular disciple, and Krishna conveys the love and the attitude of the Guru toward that disciple. That does not mean that a Guru can never hear your prayer. I mean, who am I to say that? Obviously, by Krishna's mercy and arrangement, all these things are possible. It's possible that you pray to a Guru or pray to Prabhupada and he actually hears you. I'm just saying, though, under normal circumstances, judging from Prabhupada's manifest pastimes and from everything we know about Jiva souls, I don't see a Guru listening simultaneously with comprehension to hundreds of thousands or millions of prayers. It doesn't seem practical. So those are the questions I got. And then Arjuna in New Zealand sent me, I think, another question. So maybe some more were added. Let me see if I can read those. Oh, by the way, if anyone writes in a serious question on Facebook, I'll try to get to it today. Okay, here's another question. Preaching by logic and debate. Devotees often tell us that defeating somebody with logic and philosophy does not change their heart, nor does it cause them to take up Krishna consciousness. The caveat to this is someone who is attracted to Krishna consciousness but has some doubts. In this case, logic is considered effective. Actually, it should be an E. Effective in removing their doubts. Would you agree with the status quo on this? Sometimes. Some people are changed by being defeated. I mean, when Lord Chaitanya defeated Sarvabhauma, it definitely changed his heart. And it depends on how you do it. If you just humiliate someone, they may not love you. But if you have an open, fair discussion and you show better arguments, yeah, that actually does change some people's hearts. So to say that logic and philosophy never convinces anyone, I think is absurd. And I hope that's not coming from someone who is kind of all into their heart chakra or something. There are actually some people in the world, believe it or not, who have intellectual integrity and who really do want to know the truth and who do appreciate a reasonable presentation. So I think it's kind of silly to say that no one ever was converted to Krishna consciousness by good arguments. That's obviously not true. It obviously was never true. But again, it depends on how you do it. So you say that we should develop the art of persuasion. Are you referring to something different by saying that, or do you think that argument by logic and philosophy are underrated in ISKCON? Oh yeah, I mean ISKCON is yeah. There's a very wide belief, very widespread belief in ISKCON. Okay, Parang Shreyas just said he wrote a question. I'll try to get to that. A widespread belief that if you know the philosophy, if you can answer like multiple choice questions on a Bhakti Shastri test, then you're a philosopher. No, it just means that you have memorized our teachings. Philosopher means you can actually present sound arguments and point out the weaknesses in other arguments. So I think it would be nice to have more emphasis on education. For every school that ISKCON builds, we build about at least 10 temples, if not 100. So yeah, if you look at how many good schools we have and how many temples we have with elaborate rituals and puja, it's a little scary that ISKCON seems to give so much more importance to ritual than to education, educating devotees, including our own children. Another question, I myself am extremely logical and philosophical and struggle to find a use for this in preaching due to the fact that most people don't like to think deeply and are often put off by too much logic. Can you suggest a way to use this ability? Well, it's an art to present good arguments in a way that inspires people. I was just in New Zealand and Australia, and I did a lot of programs, and I present a lot of arguments, but I tried to make it fun for people. I mean, it's fun for me, and either by humor or, I mean, it's not that I just, write jokes before my classes as a technique. I actually find this world to be, well, I don't want to say a joke, but amusing in its own way. And so I think if we really try hard to show people why this is important, not just give arguments, but show people why it's important, why they could have a better life if they understand this. And if we do it in a sympathetic way, then we may have better luck. So in ISKCON, we have many very intelligent and sincere leaders who are really good at boiling the milk. But some seem unable to appreciate the necessity of Krishna West and find it too radical or even iconoclastic. What is the reason for this oversight on their part? Well, this is an extraordinary opportunity for me to get into a lot of trouble by criticizing other leaders. So I would say that there's a difference between boiling the milk and burning the milk. And, if you boil milk too long, it's called burning the milk. I think that leaders who don't like Krishna West should present reasonable arguments. And if I'm able to refute those arguments in a reasonable way, or if they are able to refute my arguments in a reasonable way, then everyone should be willing to admit it. So my personal experience is it's not that everyone just wants to come to the rational truth of the matter. And it's not always possible to have a reasonable discussion and everyone accepts what is reasonable. Of course, people may disagree, but again, I don't want to criticize the leaders. I think I've made good points. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made them. And if after making them, if someone gave me a reasonable critique, I would have adjusted my points. So the points I make, I think, are reasonable. Otherwise, I would never make them. And I think they're reasonable after having dealt with all kinds of objections and counter arguments. I believe that I am reasonably establishing my points. And so people accept or don't accept it, that's something they have to live with. What is the reason for this oversight on their part? I better not get myself in more trouble. Is it because it's an inconvenient truth for them? That is, they love Indian culture and don't want to change. That's possible for some people. Is it because they can't bear the thought they have been wasting their time using ineffective strategies? I wouldn't say wasting their time. I think devotees are sincerely trying to serve Krishna. Do people become attached to and committed to a certain tradition without really thinking about it objectively? All the time. Is that very typical human behavior? Oh, yes. Is that why some leaders don't like Krishna West? Leave it to your own imagination. Or is it because you're unable to see the bigger picture due to the proximity effect? I think the real thing we need to look at is that the Western Hare Krishna movement is just a tiny little fragment, shadow of what it used to be when Prabhupada was here. It's difficult for me to understand how anyone could not be deeply, profoundly disturbed by that and not want to do whatever it takes within Prabhupada's instructions to fix that. It just is something which I may never really fully understand why people wouldn't, seeing that Prabhupada's whole global strategy was based on his Western mission, seeing the state of the Western mission, it does puzzle me. I have to admit that more devotees don't realize the obvious fact, to me the obvious fact, that this is what we need to really be thinking about. And there's even a North American Vision Committee, which gives a vision of how to get the movement going, and Western preaching did not make it. They put it as one of the 12 things we care about, but then when they boiled it down, I think, to the top 5 important things we need to focus on to revive our Western mission, Western preaching did not make it into the list. Again, I don't want to criticize, so I better not say anything. Let's see. Music and consciousness. Are there some genres of music which cannot be used to convey Krishna consciousness? Well, music and passion and ignorance, especially music and ignorance, don't do it. Music and passion, not so great. Krishna teaches, use things in the mode of goodness to serve him. Is there something to be said about elevating people from where they are at? Yeah, I mean, if you take an elevator, you generally take it from the floor you're on, right? Not from the floor you're not on. So yes, we have to definitely elevate people starting where they are right now. For example, we have some hardcore punk bands, Shelter in 108, which despite making music which Jamuna Devi felt had lots of anger in it, were able to have an elevating influence on the underground punk scene in America and who were leaders in the straight edge punk scene. This indicates that although not bringing people to the mode of goodness, they were causing them to take less drugs and come closer to the goal in this way. That's a good example. The hardcore punk bands, to be honest, I couldn't honestly say their music was always in the mode of goodness. But it did reach, people, did reach some people, and it definitely helped save some souls. And so, in a sense, I'm contradicting what I just said. I suppose that to reach special audiences, to reach special groups of people, yeah, we have to sometimes meet them where they're at. So, because the hardcore punk devotee bands definitely helped a significant number of people. Then another question, how is it that if you put water in your mouth and spit it out, it's suchi, but if you swallow it, it's muchi? Seriously? Drinking water is muchi. Got me there. Oh, I suppose maybe they mean that if you drink water, you should wash your hands, but if you take water and spit it out, you don't have to wash your hands. Frankly, if I spit, I probably want to wash my hands just because I'm not like a world-class spitter, and I may accidentally spit on myself a little bit at least, just like a tiny drop. So I think whether if you put water in your mouth and spit it out or drink it, you may want to wash your hands. We wonder what the extent is of Krishna West in adjusting the externals. What's your stance on shikas? Shikas, interesting point. We know Prabhupada wanted the shika. We also know that Prabhupada said that there's no rule against having longer hair, presumably without a shika, but that he didn't want that in ISKCON because he was afraid the public would think we were hippies. So I published a paper in which I analyzed Goswami's, I believe it was 1967 deviation, and Prabhupada directly says there is no rule against long hair or beard. His own guru did that for a while. Prabhupada had a mustache. Prabhupada was not shaved up as a grihasta. So the Sikha also used by many other religions. It's not just a Vaishnava thing. There are actually a number of other religions, there are religions all around the world that use some kind of Sikha. So my stance on Shikas, well, devotees who are brahmacharis who live in ashrams, they have standards, and which usually involve a Shika, and householders, I think it's different. What about giving our children Sanskrit names? We know these names can make it harder to get jobs, or they might get picked on at public school. Yeah, I would say try to give if you give a spiritual name, try to give a spiritual name that kind of sounds good in your local language, and not a name that sounds silly or bizarre in your local language. Prabhupada, why your dress is not a sannyasi, Tushta Krishna, the robes make people uncomfortable. Prabhupada, they see you as different and can't relate. They won't relax enough to listen when I wear robes. Prabhupada, but sannyasis must dress in saffron with robes and shaved head, etc., etc. The point is that, I mean, all of us should be old enough by now to realize that Prabhupada often says very different things on the same topic when talking about external things, not philosophy. And so there are other quotes from Prabhupada saying sannyasis, doesn't matter how they dress, and that Prabhupada himself, if it helped to spread the movement, would wear a different dress. So giving one quote on a topic like this and ignoring many other quotes is just not, doesn't really resolve anything. Prabhupada definitely gave different views on this topic, and I'm using the view that I believe is most effective for spreading the movement. We have to remember that when Prabhupada made these quotes, ISKCON was growing like crazy, so why change it if it's working? If Prabhupada came back now and saw his great Western movement collapsed, just a little fragment of what it was, for someone to say, I know Prabhupada would say, do everything exactly the same, I think is madness. I think we have extraordinary, massive evidence that Prabhupada would not, if something's working or not working, he wouldn't say the same thing unless it was a basic principle. He wouldn't say, don't chant Hare Krishna. He wouldn't say, don't follow the four principles. So basic, essential things Prabhupada would not change even if it wasn't really working. But details we can and should change. And if Prabhupada saw that the results now are totally different than they were, I have no doubt Prabhupada would say something else. So that's it for that. And now Parang Shreyas asked a question. Let me see if I can find that. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Sonia Bianca. Oh, Sonia, what's the Vedic view on gun ownership, self-defense for householders, and defense against tyrannical government? The NRA, the National Rama Association. That is a detail. That is a detail which depends on time, place, and circumstances. Devotees often think there's a Vedic view on everything, but actually there's not. I mean, the Vedic knowledge, we get general principles, basic principles, but oftentimes not details. The details we have to work out practically. So Parang Shreyas, how is it that Balaram was so sympathetic towards, I've gotten this question many times. Balaram was so sympathetic towards Duryodhana, although Duryodhana was a kind of Kali's agent. He was a Kali agent. And inimical against the Pandavas. He represented Adharma, but as far as I know, Balaram had some sympathy for Duryodhana. How is that, I wonder? Okay, simple question. Good cop, bad cop, as they say. Krishna's doing a few things there. Krishna, of course, and Balaram are the same person. We are monotheists. So people could misunderstand. People tend to misunderstand, and the Bhagavatam speaks to this all the time, that because Krishna came to this world and defended, protected, and supported one group of people, the Pandavas or the devotees, and fought against another group of people, the Asuras, people could say, well, this isn't God, because God is equal to everyone, if everyone is a child of God. And therefore, this comes up all the time in the Bhagavatam. And the Bhagavatam always says that Krishna is equal to everyone, but he reciprocates. So apparently supporting one group and apparently opposing another group, Krishna is actually fairly reciprocating with everyone. However, to make this point even more clear, Krishna in his form as Balaram basically is giving Duryodhana every possible chance to do the right thing. Because every soul is a child of God. And so Balaram is encouraging Duryodhana in the hope that he will do the right thing. He will give up his demonic activities When Balaram taught club fighting to Duryodhana, again, it was an attempt to reach out to him, to make a special effort, to keep the family together. It was also better for the world. Krishna was also, as Balaram was befriending Duryodhana to try to save millions and millions of lives. Because if the battle of Kurukshetra could be avoided, millions of lives would be saved. So, for various reasons, to make clear that the Lord is equal to everyone, and the other reasons I gave, Balaram helped Duryodhana, but Balaram never supported Duryodhana in a bad activity. So Balaram's support did not extend to supporting bad activities. We have Chandravali there from Latvia. So, let's see. What requirements do you have? This is from, the name is funny, Big B Fizzlepop, which I don't think that's like this devotee's legal name, but it's from Auckland, New Zealand. Big B Fizzlepop. That's a really cool name for your Facebook account. What requirements do you have to get initiated from you? Could you please give your thoughts on chanting japa as well as chanting offensively? Hare Krishna, as far as requirements, chant 16 rounds, follow the 4 principles, be a loyal member of Prabhupada's mission, and do that for the time required by ISKCON law, which I think is a year. So I don't place any special requirements. Chanting japa, I've always said, is extremely important because if you think about it, in our other devotional activities, even if you're not in a tremendously Krishna conscious mood, it's still kind of fun, like eating prasadam. I mean, if there's a real feast laid out there, it may not be your most spiritual day of the week, but you can certainly eat, and you can eat enthusiastically. And even kirtan, you've seen kirtans where devotees just, it becomes sort of like a, I don't know, you'd call it a rave or something, where devotees are spinning around, jumping, dancing, shouting, banging on drums. So for, I guess, young people, to be honest, that's a lot of fun, whether you're thinking of Krishna or not. And to be honest, sometimes you get into the middle of these kirtans, and you may not necessarily feel that everyone is intensely thinking of Krishna. It becomes more like everyone's just dancing wildly and banging on drums and just having a good time. So, but now look at japa. Japa, there's no material reward. I mean, if you just sit down and chant japa quietly or walk around, it's not like eating, which you can do no matter what mood you're in. It's not like, it's not even like a real bang bang kirtan, which, I mean, non-devotees enjoy things like that. So you can enjoy running around with your friends, shouting, banging on drums, whether you're Krishna conscious or not. But japa, you really have to be Krishna conscious. If you're not thinking of Krishna, japa is very boring. Let's be honest. If you are thinking of Krishna, it's ecstatic. If you're not thinking of Krishna, it's very boring, which is why japa is often the first thing to go. If someone is having trouble with their spiritual life, often the first thing to go out the window is japa, because you're not going to give up feasting. You're not going to give up running around with your friends and jumping up and down, banging on drums. But it's just sitting there with no material payoff, no reward. It's just you and Krishna. So if I'm not Krishna conscious, if I'm not really thinking of Krishna, like I said, there's not much fun in japa. If you are thinking of Krishna, it's the most ecstatic activity. So it's really your private quality time with Krishna. So if you are not interested in japa, you are not interested in having private quality time with Krishna. That's why in Prabhupada's initiation vow, interestingly, Even though Prabhupada emphasized, for example, Mangalarti, Guru Puja, but it's not in the initiation vow. Prabhupada said we need to associate with devotees, but it's not in the initiation vow. Prabhupada said read my books, but it's not in the initiation vow. This is very interesting. In the initiation vow is chant 16 rounds, because that is the real test of whether we want to spend time with Krishna or not, or whether we find Krishna boring. Because remember, Krishna is not different from his name. So if I find japa boring, it means I find Krishna boring. If I find Krishna boring, I literally need to have my head examined. And so we have a problem. If we find Krishna boring, we definitely have a problem. So Krishnendu wants to know, what can we learn from evangelical churches that seem successful at expanding their members beyond just clothing? Oh, we're not just going to talk about clothing. Okay. Well, for one thing, when you go into a lot of these churches, you were really received well. I've seen Hare Krishna temples where if you show up on Sunday, it's like, you sort of get in line for the prasadam. So, and some temples, of course, have much better guest reception programs. But I would say guest reception is not at there isn't like a really high standard that you find at every temple. I think it's hard to be really enthusiastic to make new members if people hardly ever join. It's like being a telemarketer where maybe one person in 100 will even talk to you. So it's not a high-paid job. It's not like people are waiting in line to become telemarketers. So we need to present Krishna consciousness in a way where we have a reasonable chance of convincing people to join us. So I think the more we make practical presentations, the more people will be interested in, and the more we will be enthusiastic to make that extra effort to bring people to Krishna. So thank you to all of those who wrote in. Okay, let's see. Sonanda Chandra Devi, how would you respond to those who say our bhakti experiences are a placebo effect? Okay, for those who don't know what a placebo effect is, maybe I can just, because be a little lazy here and get a quick definition online, so don't have to think. Oh, placebo effect. Sorry about that. A beneficial effect produced by a placebo drug or treatment that cannot be attributed to. So placebo means, of course you have to know what a placebo is. A placebo is a harmless pill, medicine, or procedure prescribed more for the psychological benefit to the patient than for physiological effect. In other words, let's say someone's a hypochondriac. They're not really sick, but the person thinks they're sick. So the doctor just gives them a pill, which is really, there's no medicine in it. And then the person, because they think they took some medicine, they feel better. So placebo effect means you're not taking real medicine, but in a sense, you are psychologically or subconsciously self-healing. Because you think you are taking an effective medicine, you get better because you just kind of your mind kind of talks you into health. So that's the placebo effect. So how do we know that our experiences are, well, there's a very easy way to test that, and that is show that you can get the same effect without bhakti. And I haven't really seen that. For example, in the case of, usually the way they test placebo effect is they'll have two groups of people. One group takes real medicine, the other group just takes a placebo, but they both get the same effect. So if we found there were, significant numbers of people getting the same effect we are, we could talk about it without Krishna consciousness. But you could say, how do you know a tomato isn't really, I don't know, a jet airplane? Well, because tomatoes don't look like jet airplanes. I mean, when we practice bhakti yoga, you could say maybe you're just talking yourself into believing in Krishna, but why would I think that? Why would I think that? It's there's nothing about my experience of Krishna which would indicate that to me. And if it was the case that a person sort of habitually imagines things or talks themselves into things that aren't really true or aren't really effective, but I think someone proposing that it's a placebo effect would have to give a good reason why we should think that. Otherwise, you could say everything is a placebo effect. I mean, when you eat good food and it makes you healthy, that's a placebo effect. When you drink pure water and feel good, that's a placebo effect. When you exercise and your body gets stronger, that's a placebo effect. I mean, you can just call anything a placebo effect, but it's not a serious question unless you have some serious evidence. Just reading some of these things. Let's see. You have spoken about different, this is from Chandravali in Latvia. You have spoken about different dharmas in various situations. What is the final criteria for decision making in cases where morality, right and wrong, black and white, might appear dubious while higher goal is achieved at the same time? Sometimes I find there's a lot of threatening and guilt invoking techniques and preaching, but is it not that ultimately Krishna sees bigger picture, sees our final intentions in the heart, which motivates our actions and even overlooks smaller weaknesses? Otherwise, how are we different from some spiritual religious groups who are fixed on talking about sin and guilt? Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been kind of shocked lately in my travels, because so many devotees kept telling me that some ISKCON leader told me, or some devotee told me, that if I don't do this or that, I won't go back to Godhead. And all kinds of things, like it gets to the point where if you act like an adult in the Hare Krishna movement, you won't go back to Godhead. In other words, if you don't think that some authority should micromanage every detail of your life, even though you're an adult, then you won't go back to Godhead. And so this weaponizing of salvation, turning salvation into a weapon to beat people over the head and threaten them, and if you do this, you won't go back to Godhead. If you do that, I think we should really knock it off. I mean, really just, whoever is talking this way should probably calm down, take a deep breath, count to 10 or something, maybe drink some water. First of all, Krishna decides who goes back to Godhead, not me and not you. So it's not that someone won't go back to Krishna because someone said that. I mean, obviously, we have to earn it. If we have very strong material desires, it's very likely we won't go back to the spiritual world immediately, because what would you do there with all these material desires? So, I think that gurus with disciples, ISKCON leaders with people in their programs should avoid weaponizing, avoid turning salvation into a weapon to frighten people and harass them and coerce them into doing whatever we want them to do. We need to calm down a little bit and not do that. As far as what we should do, we just present Krishna consciousness. People have free will. They're mostly adults, and whatever they choose, that's life. Krishnendu wants to know if I can loan him some money. Just kidding. Krishnendu wants to know, how important are small groups for training devotees? They seem a key part of Christian preaching as a way of educating and developing relationships. Yeah, personal is better than impersonal. I mean, better schools have smaller classes. So if we have enough people, qualified people, so we could have small devotee training classes, that's a really nice thing. Let's see, anything else? I think that's it. That's all the questions I found. So I'd like to thank everyone very much for your attention and appreciate your time. So thank you and hope to see you again soon. Hare Krishna.